And I was explaining this to Candy. I said, I'm looking for a thread. And
she'd be a good person to ask.
She said the thread is green, isn't it? Meaning money, of course. Which I thought was very funny.
Oh, that's Candy. That's terribly funny.
But
I really love Candy. If anyone could think of a thread, it would be she. What Candy means by green is whether they can afford Newport. Afford the clubs are terribly expensive, and running the house is terribly expensive. That is the hardest thing for everybody to do, is to justify the immense dues and the expense of one dinner. And if you didn't entertain attractively, people just wouldn't go another time. Why would they go? Because there's so many people who do entertain very well. Isn't that a pretty fire? All the fires burn like this. People are often at dinners amazed when they say, you put some gasoline on it. And I said, gasoline? Why would I need gasoline? And they said, well, I've never seen a fire go up and burn so completely.
it's so dry.
By the time we finish the interview, there'll be nothing but ashes left. I was born at home in New York City, December 21, 1915. I was my mother's fifth effort. The first year she was married, she had a miscarriage. Second year, third year, fourth year, Muriel was born dead, and I came the fifth year. We went on and had, you see, two more daughters, and we lost my youngest little sister when she was 6. My father was a banker. He was a vice president of the old Equitable Trust Company.
The home was what part of New York?
11 East 89. The house is still standing. It's on the same street where the Guggenheim Museum is on the corner. There were 6 floors above ground and 2 below.
In this house?
In that house.
And your family had the whole?
Yes, of course. That's what a private house is. Mommy and Daddy built it. They started building it when they were married, which was in 1910. And I think they moved in 1912. Come and sit here and I'll show you my favorite spot in the house. These are Daddy's, and these are Daddy's and then John's. And then these are part of Granny's gold set. Yes.
Do you use them?
No, not at all. But I sit and enjoy them. Here's my little sister Beryl, the first little Beryl who died when she was 6 years old. Pink velvet, pale, pale pink. It was so pretty with feathers. She was the beauty of the family, the pale blue eyes. She was such a good little girl. She died in the end of meningitis, cerebral meningitis, but she got pneumonia when she was having her appendix taken out. Mommy always thought the doctors had a window open in the old Harbor Hospital where they operated. It's just the saddest story. And here's Daddy when he went to Harvard. And here's John and Margie in Egypt. And here is Grandpa Sherman. And there is the only thing I have of my great-grandmother on my father's side, my Tennessee great-grandmother.
A lot of people think that our family founded Brown University, and that's just not right. From the earliest times, after Roger Williams made the colony viable, education was recognized as the key to the future. And the first Rhode Island college, based on Baptist principles, was in Warren, Rhode Island. And then after a while, people realized that Providence was where the action was. And they moved it. And Brown University became Brown University because Nicholas Brown, my direct ancestor, was instrumental in procuring the land and making an initial donation.
My grandmother grew up in a very rarefied environment. She was very well educated for a woman of that era and the society that she grew up in. She was very intelligent, she was very beautiful, she was a great tennis player, she was very sporting. She had a great sense of adventure, but she was also very practical. She participated in all the rites of passage, as it were, that a woman who grew up in New York and Newport would have at that time. Jack Astor's mother was pregnant with Jack on the Titanic. His father died when the ship sank. He grew up with his mother in New York, in his father's house in New York and in Newport. He did inherit a fortune on his 21st birthday, and he ran in the same circles as my grandmother. Vacationed here in Newport, they saw each other in New York, and I think for a glamorous young debutante, he would have been considered a good catch.
It was really almost as though it had been a family plan, as opposed to falling madly in love. She had said he was terribly handsome and dashing, but she had never got to know him very well because they both had chaperones. They had drivers, chauffeurs. Wherever she went with her chauffeur. She could never be on her own anywhere. And then when they met, the chauffeurs would sort of stand, in the background somewhere, and they never really were alone together. They were always chaperoned, which was the way it was for her generation. She had gone over to the Waldorf Astoria within days of the wedding. All the presents were in, and everything was planned. It was in the afternoon, and she'd gone up to the suite that he rented. A great many of the bachelors in those days would rent hotel suites. And she had gone in, and there was, probably 6 or 7 people there, his friends. And they were great sportsmen, and they loved playing games. But this particular game was something that so shocked and offended her, because they had ordered martinis, and of course the Waldorf suites were beautifully decorated, and they were throwing the martinis, trying to make there was an imaginary ring around the room, around the wall, and they were trying to have their martini hit that line, and then, betting as to who did better, because they were able to actually shoot the martini contents against this sort of ring on the wall. And my mother, having survived the depression, and of course most of the families were terribly affected by the depression, and having known the value of $1 and having to cut down enormously on the household budget, she thought to herself, how much is it going to cost to repair this wallpaper, to recover these fabrics of these sofas? This is terribly irresponsible. How could a 21-year-old man not have some understanding that you don't willfully destroy property this way? She went home and she said, he's too immature. There's no way I could marry someone who would play a game like that.
She broke it off within days of the wedding. With the support of her family, her grandmother took my great-grandparents and Granny and her sister to Europe. They skipped that Newport season just because they wanted to remove themselves from any talk that may have been continuing. And then she came back and continued her life here, but certainly for a woman of that era, married perhaps a little bit later. My grandparents were introduced by mutual acquaintances in New York in, I would say, the early part of 1939. And they had a very short engagement. They were then married in December of 1940. Mostly family, perhaps a few intimate friends, but nothing, no bridesmaids, nothing, not the sort of spectacle that, her sister would have had.
Newport gave something special because it was by the sea, and Southern planters, in the 1820s, 30s, and 40s, would come up here for the summer to get away from the very oppressive heat. Then, of course, the Civil War came, and nobody came anyplace. And after the war, there weren't really any rich Southern planters left to come. And instead, it was the New Yorkers who came up. Newport became the glitterati, the people that were famous of the day. My ancestors, my grandfather, John Nicholas Brown, came down here because it was nice in the summer, and that's kind of what you did. But the Sherman side, my great aunt Augusta, who married William Watt Sherman, was much more of a Newporter and had a very substantial house. And of course, that's the line that goes back to Eileen.
The way I got this house was that when Aunt Georgette died, the house reverted to the family, the whole family. And John bought the house, my John, bought the house from John Nicholas Brown, who was Mummy's first cousin. So it never went out of the family. I mean, it was never on the open market or anything.
How many rooms does this place have?
I just don't know. It depends what you count a room. Do you count that hall a room? Then the little outside hall, do you count that a room? I really promise you, I just don't know.
Yeah.
As a child, it was an adventure almost showing up here in the house. In a lot of ways, it felt like a museum of our family history, and we were reminded everywhere we looked exactly as to where we fit into the bigger picture of things, because there were so many ancestors whose portraits were up on the walls, and there were photographs in every room, and it was just a very powerful reminder of the legacy of the people who preceded us, going back many generations. So my father is Adam Clayton Powell III. He is the son of the late Congressman Adam Clayton Powell Jr., who actually passed away about 2 months before I was born, so I never met him. He represented Harlem in the U.S. Congress, the House of Representatives, for about 25 years, give or take. And he was a Democrat, and he was a very influential and respected and powerful Democrat. And that political orientation formed the basis of my father's side of the family. My grandfather was married to Hazel Scott, who was a jazz pianist, and she was in her time very famous also, and very well known and very respected. And so there was a pretty powerful legacy that came down on that side of the family. On my mother's side, you might say almost that there was an equal and opposite orientation, at least politically, very, very strongly on the Republican side. Being a product of these two families, I was given the opportunity to choose from a very, very wide range, and essentially no matter which way I turned out, at least in my political beliefs and passions, I was going to be in alignment with one wing or another of the family.
That's Margie.
Oh, okay.
She's my baby, and she's the one who had the 5 children. And you see, here's John Slocum and me.
Right.
And here's Margie and her husband, John Trevor. And there's Jerry at the point when he was divorced from wife number 1.
So those were started, of course, in the 50s. They chronicled life in Germany, the 3 years that the family spent there. And then I guess they returned to the United States, to Washington. And then they went overseas for about a year to Belgium, and then returned, and again to Washington, and then overseas to Egypt.
During our stay in Tuxedo, I felt as though the clock had been turned back, and it was perhaps 1947 or 1948. Our dogwood and lilacs bloomed, the vases were filled with our peonies, our lilies of the valley decorated the dining room table, and Beryl and Mr. Slocum wandered in the woods picking blueberries. We had our tea together daily between 4 and 5 o'clock in my bedroom, and the children sailed on the lake, played tennis, and read books assigned to them by Groton and Miss Hewitts.
Our life in the State Department had been such a social one that we just continued the thing the way it was. Everywhere we went, we went out 7 nights a week. In Egypt, we slept in the afternoon. It would get very hot. We would arrive at dinner in someone's garden at 10 o'clock at night. John would get up and leave for the embassy at 8 o'clock, and he would come home, and we'd have lunch. At that time it would get very, very warm. The shutters of the house would be closed, the lovely big dark shutters. You see how it burns down now? It really gives one a great deal of heat. I like to do my own dusting. I can do it so much better than anybody else. I like pictures to stand erect like soldiers. I don't like them to slope and be put on in a sloppy way. They all balance, you see. 1, 1, 2, 1, 2, 3.
In a historical sense, the Gilded Age is really from Lincoln's death until McKinley's death. So it goes from the end of the Civil War to Theodore Roosevelt's presidency. You need to have pedigree, you need to have wealth, you need to prove your status and your by showing it off. And so moving from place to place, filling up your time for people who don't have work becomes an occupation. You know, they give, but they certainly are much more interested in displaying their wealth than they are in giving it away. There's also a desire to emulate the Europeans, to get European servants, to take up a lifestyle that looks like European aristocracy, wearing fashionable clothes, going to the races, sailing, gambling, going to all the hot spots and watering holes that the European aristocracy would have gone to.
Yeah, Bailey's Beach is, you know, an exclusive beach social club where you pretty much have to be born in to be a member. You can't buy your way in. You can't win it in a lottery. They don't let big politicians in. That wasn't the kind of place it is. It's not for someone who owns a corporate jet or a Learjet. But if you had the pedigree and you were born into a certain family in Newport, you know, the Slocums, say, or the Pells, you can have lunch at Bailey's Beach whenever you want. But what people in Newport always talked about was John Kennedy was president of the United States, but of course he was Catholic, and he wasn't born into the society, so he would actually have to sign the tabs for lunches there at Bailey's Beach Club in the name of his father-in-law, Mr. Auchincloss.
Well, I came from Philadelphia, and my name was Betty Brooke. My mother and father always came to Newport. All of our age group played on the beach and everything like that. We got to know each other very well and had a wonderful time. And so I've known Eileen since we were 3 years old, which is a long time, because I'm 93 now, and we were the same age. My mother was on the Titanic. I had half a brother and a half sister, and they were both on the Titanic. And that was Mother's first marriage, and she was married to Rudolph Carter. And and lived in, they lived in all over the place, you know. And he was very, very interested in horses, so they had the horses on board of the Titanic, and they had dogs, and they also had a car. You saw the movie. Yeah, well, that car that's in the movie had been made specially for my mother, because she got in one of the first lifeboats, and he got in one of the first lifeboats and left her, and then she had to look after the children. It's a very long, complicated story, you know. We came to Newport in the summer, and then I got married the first time, and I lived in London for 3 years. And then I got a divorce and came back and lived in New York. And I never did move back to Philadelphia again. I lived in New York, and then I went to Palm Beach in the wintertime. And then it was during the war, it was about 1943, and my husband was running an airplane plant, Jock McLean was running an airplane plant down in Dallas, Texas. So we moved down there and lived there during the whole time of the war. I've been married 5 times. I haven't been married since 1972. Oh yes, Eileen used to call you up and say, I'm giving a little party. And then of course the little party was, you know, about 90 people. She said, I'm just having a few people for dinner. And then, of course, then it was enormous parties, you know, 90, I mean, I'd been there when they had 90 people for dinner, you know. And then a little party was probably, you know, 40 or 50 or something of that sort.
I tell my children that the art of good conversation is to bring up the subject that you know and you think they would like and they don't know. Can put it better the way I tell the children, but you discuss something, or you start the conversation with whatever you feel they don't know about but would like to know.
It was the style of her entertaining was clearly the style of the end of the 19th, the best part of the 20th century. The table was set magnificently, and the dining room was big enough to hold a lot of people. The table is wide enough to have 2, if not 3 people across the narrow ends. Newport is set up so that if you want to give a ritzy party, all you do is dial a certain number, and maids and butlers and whatever quantity needed appear, and all very skilled in their profession.
We're in Marble House on the terrace, and Eileen came in with sort of a grand entrance. She had 2 or 3 other women with her, and they were all dressed to the nines, and she had these long gloves that came up above her elbows. And it was quite astounding, and I turned to Judy and I said, Judy, Eileen really is the grande dame. There was no one else in the entire Marble House that had gloves of any sort on. And she looked the part, she performed the part, she always performed the part. And she did it naturally. It was never superficial or phony. She was a natural grande dame. She had all the stories, she had all the context, she had all the etiquette. And I think she enjoyed it very much.
Our Newport house, a veritable British castle, attracts friends and acquaintances from near and far. Ministering to their wants plus those of my growing family, in addition to operating the house that we have been occupying since March 1st, 1967, would be a big job in anybody's language. I have to get you away from home just to see something of you, John explodes, kissing me. This I can't deny. The orbit of my existence is the dimensions of the Newport house. As I have come to believe, in the end, that our tangible property is our greatest source of social power.
the young man whom I was dating, who was still at Harvard majoring in history, said, well, next autumn I will be going to Columbia Law School and we'll stay at your apartment, which was a studio apartment on West 71st Street, and I will go to law school. And I thought, this is not exactly what my mother had in mind. And so I went with him to a cocktail party given by Rachel Haddis, whose father was a distinguished professor of Greek and Latin at Columbia. And I saw a tall, handsome man across the room, and and I went over and introduced myself, and it was Adam Powell, Adam Clayton Powell III. Well, we had a lovely wedding, and my mother called people. She was just a little concerned about the fact that it was a little outside her range of experience. So, and various people, like a great aunt of mine in California, wrote her a letter saying, you have my deepest sympathy for this tragic misalliance. And so a lot of my mother's friends were reacting in kind of a, were criticizing, and I myself received about 40 letters from the general public saying nasty things about intermarriage.
Like what?
Like using the N-word, and and they would just address them to Beryl Slocum, Newport, Rhode Island, and just sort of racist kind of letters. But my mother was a little apprehensive about the fact that it hadn't happened ever in her social circles. And so she called people, and I remember the wife of the director of the Smithsonian, Dylan Ripley's wife, said, I think her name was Mary Ripley, said, well, I don't know how you feel about your daughter walking down the aisle with a black, but I would be heartbroken. No, I cannot come to the wedding.
Eileen Slocum was interesting because she was one of the few of those people who got her hands dirty in local politics. It's very rare for most of these folks to really be involved. And she was involved as Republican National Committee woman for years and years and years. And I would see her at national conventions and at state conventions, and she would do that, and she would open her house for fundraisers to help local Republicans as well as national Republicans. The last one that I remember covering was for Vice President Cheney, was at her house to raise money for the Bush-Cheney campaign, I believe, in 2004. But she was also someone who was dedicated to helping the anti-abortion movement.
There were the great political events, which of course all of us as children were just awed by. I mean, obviously the event, the party for President Ford, and then there was a party for George Herbert Walker Bush, and then there was a party for Vice President Agnew. And then there were all the coming out parties, which are sort of, for all intents and purposes, they're coming of age parties for the granddaughters. And well, we had them when we grew up, and then our children did. And then there were the weddings. And I have to tell you, I think those were among the most joyous occasions for my mother. Because then all the family and all the friends would come together. And we totally let my mother plan everything because she took so much joy in it.
I was sitting next to John at lunch one day, and he looked down the table, and I guess there was about 14 or 16 people, you know, big lunch. And he said, he said, I don't know any single person at this table. And I said, well, neither do I, John. So that makes us even. I mean, it was always like that. They were politicians, they were people. You know, she was very involved in politics, as you know. And she was very, very good. She was a Republican, a very staunch Republican.
She considered herself a typical local Newporter and a typical Rhode Islander. I mean, she wouldn't mind telling people she was related to the Browns, I think she even found a connection with Roger Williams. I mean, she had very lovely paintings in her house, portraits, the Drexels and the Browns, and she was never a relation of mine, but she always claimed I was a member of the family, as was my father and my stepmother, and even though she was a very staunch Republican, she was very pleased to have Jack Kennedy as a friend and as a guest. She was a great patriot. I mean, and even though she served the Republican Party, she had people from, I mean, I went into a garden party of hers, and in comes Jerry Ford. Right after Jerry Ford comes Buddy Cianci. I mean, you know, she mixes everybody up.
Eileen Slocum was the queen of the Republican Party. And when I would come here to dinner, there were always a group of Republican politicians included among the guests. And after dinner, Eileen would call on them to get up and say something about who's going to be the Republican candidate for governor, or what are we going to do if we had a Republican governor? Is he going to raise taxes, or is he going to build this, or whatever he's going to do? But she'd save meat for last. And then after all these Republicans had talked, she'd call on me and sort of say, all right, Bruce, you heard all those Republicans. What do you have to say now? And I'd get up and try and cut the Republicans to ribbons, and it was sort of fun. I enjoyed it. I think the Republicans did.
In her political travels out west, she had come into a home in Kansas where she'd seen a book on a coffee table where there was a picture of John Carter Brown. And she had said, well, what is this book? Why is this here? And they had said, oh, well, he was the great supporter of the Underground Railroad. And of course, his uncle, his great uncle, Moses Brown, was one of the first most famous abolitionists in this country. And so my mother had always had a feeling of wanting to support heroic causes. And she felt protecting unborn children to her was a cause that she could throw her weight behind, and that she felt really was in the same category as the abolition. And then later on, she began to become particularly active within the party, hoping to prevent Republican funds to be given to people who refused to sign the ban on partial birth abortion.
My mother was, in some respects, very Chinese, in that the Chinese worship their ancestors. She felt the continuum, and she also felt that she was just, for want of a better term, a link in a chain. That, in other words, she had been given certain things, that it was her duty to pass on, and that we ought to pass on in turn to our own children. Not only material things, but values as well.
The mail is my anathema.
How are you ever going to get through all this mail?
And none of those have been opened, but they're in elastic bands anyway. And here are my most marvelous ones.
There's mail everywhere.
Couldn't stand to be parted from them. Very sentimental about the people who sent them. Couldn't stand to be parted from the personal letters. Kept the letters and opened her mail in a very unusual way. She wouldn't open it each day because she was usually quite busy and there was a great deal of mail that came in. She felt she owed every single letter, including what some people call junk mail. She actually said that the word she did not approve of that. If some company spent the time to put an advertisement in an envelope and send it to her. She was jolly well going to go through it and read it. So sometimes mail would stack up that hadn't been opened, that was old mail. So there were the saved personal letters, and then there was the unopened mail, which was very large stacks, unfortunately.
I can't remember her ever buying any piece of furniture anywhere at any time in my life. I don't remember her buying many clothes. She would inherit from various members of the family items including their clothing. She wore my grandmother's clothes for a while. She wore her sister Phyllis's clothes for a while. Most recently, we had some cousins we were very close to, whose clothes she wore, and she was very comfortable in them. And I remember her, in the case of these cousins, saying to me, "Well, your cousin Tom has this wonderful suit. Don't you want to wear it? Or he has a jacket that would look very good on you." And I say, "Mom, I don't think it's quite my size, not quite right." I'd find some way of backing off.
How long was he in your employ?
About 10 years.
Oh my goodness.
I can't believe that I didn't discover it. Margie claims that she found out right away. But Jerry and Beryl has been living with me for 14 years, and as an adult, and she adored Hector. And every now and then, I would find one of a set gone. Jerry called me about 9 o'clock, and he said, "This seems a strange hour to do this, but Detective Brendan Doherty is coming to the house because he has a warrant for the arrest of Hector."
I arrived here at the Slocum residence, 459 Bellevue Avenue, at approximately 10 p.m. And I came into this room. The butler brought me into this room. And Mrs. Slocum was sitting at one end of this table, and I was directed to the other end of the table. And it was a little different for me because she was the victim of the crime, but I felt like she was testing my credibility in the information that I brought to her. All I wanted her to do was identify some of the china and precious artifacts that I brought in a box. Really was incredible. Just a wide array of antiques. And I was able to retrieve those, the stolen coins that Mr. Slocum had here in the home, and was stolen by a person later identified as Hector Morazzani, who was an employee, a longtime employee of the Slocum family.
Well, I moved to Newport in September of '85 with my son Sherman, my second son, and when my family in New York separated. And I lived across the street in two of the cottages until May of '94, when I moved across the street here because my father had had several strokes, and I moved across the street to help. He was in very poor health, and he couldn't swallow or stand, and he had round-the-clock nurses for 3 years. And at that point, I had planned to move to Boston, which has a greater variety of jobs, and my second son was at MIT at that point, and my first son was getting a PhD at MIT, so I thought I would move up to Boston, but when he had the strokes, it seemed to me that I would stay in Newport and help for as long as needed.
I spoke to the head neurologist at the Harvard Medical School. I said, "He will live, won't he?" And he said, "At most 3 weeks." I said, 3 weeks? You must be joking. And he said, "He will have no quality of life If he does, we will let him die peacefully and happily. That was the end of him. He lived after that 3 years and 4 months.
I'd seen them down at the beach. Their companion was right next to mine, and John was in a wheelchair. And so we had a short conversation. And then a couple of days later, Eileen said, well, oh, you must come and see your friend John again. He's resting, he's up in bed. And so I went to the house, and we went upstairs, the bedroom. Same bedroom where Eileen died. And so I said, hi, John. Goodness, you look terrific. You look much better than you did at the beach the other day. So I went to shake his hand, and I realized it was all cold, and he had died. And I said, Eileen, I'm afraid my friend John has left us. Oh, no, he's right there. I said, well, yes, but his body is there, but his soul, I think, has left us. It's obviously going up to heaven. Well, isn't that nice? That's where it should be. I said, well, that's where it is.
Mr. Benson, John Benson, was the famous stone carver whose grandson is now making the stones for Jerry and Margie. John and I had our graves carved very shortly after we came home from Germany in 1950. Who would want to wait and not know how they were going to look? I mean, why would you leave the job to the children? I can't imagine not knowing what it's going to look like. My name is on the stone with John. And all when I die, all that they have to do is carve the final date.
But what does happen over time is that this lifestyle, and the spreading of the wealth through the generations of a family, as the wealth is inherited by larger numbers of people, it gets watered down, and people either are not interested in keeping up the lifestyle, or they find it too expensive to do so. But that other life, which required large houses, large staffs of servants, that's long gone.
And then, of course, a lot of the houses just got either torn down or split up into apartments. And so it was a whole new way of life. And there are very few houses that still are intact and lived in. I mean, one of them, of course, is the Slocums. And the wonderful thing about the parties those days were they weren't charity parties. In other words, you were invited. You didn't have to pay to go. And some of the spectacular parties there were wonderful. I mean, really spectacular. A great many of them lived to a pretty ripe old age. I think their livers were all preserved in alcohol. I think it's sad that it isn't continued, but eventually you get partied out, and as a result, you don't really miss it.
We moved up here for a full year, planning to settle here in Newport, and we actually lived with Granny, and that was, something that I really always wanted to do. And we left Houston, packed up, sold our house, and came. We had a really wonderful year with her. I feel like it was such a miracle because it was her last great year where she was totally mobile, in charge, still driving, planning everything, in control. We were sitting at breakfast, and she clearly had had the first of what was to be several strokes, or was really the beginning of sort of the end. And we were talking, and she couldn't move the entire right half of her body, and she was doing this. Look at this. Can you believe? And can you believe look at this, and I can't move my face. And I was totally terrified, saying, Granny, something has really gone wrong. Something is terribly wrong. You need to go to the doctor. But she was very stubborn, and she didn't like doctors. She probably could have gone on longer, but she didn't really like the rehab either. She didn't want to do the exercises. She had never believed in exercise. And she was, very healthy up until that point. It really just was in 1 year from when I left her that morning at the breakfast table to when we came back at Christmas she was, you know, really declining. And then when we got back in the summer, she was in terrible shape. But she had learned to write with her left hand. And so we were still able to communicate. And we had some wonderful, it's hard to say chats because of course she wasn't talking, but her little chicken scrawl writing was, you know, she was really able to communicate. But it was very painful. It was hard to see it. But I'm glad that we had that time together and that we were all here with her when she died.
I came to the house, I came in, and I expected to see a casket somewhere with the deceased lying in it. And I was told, no, Eileen's upstairs. The wake is upstairs. She looked very beautiful lying in that bed. Made up, dressed well. It was a very pleasant experience to look at her.
The most incredible thing about her dying and was the support and the people who came, number of people who came to the wake and to the funeral was unbelievable. I mean, I think at that moment, probably more than ever in my life, did I then realize that she'd been someone special.
She was, for me, a link to the Gilded Age, yes. I think she seemed to have an ambiance that didn't care that the world was changing so rapidly. I think in the last 5 years, the world has changed at an exponential rate in respect to almost everything. I never saw anything that looked like it was from this age near Eileen in any way. Her manner of speaking, the things about her, or any conversation. The loss of Eileen, for me, really was a bell tolling for her generation altogether because of her age and because of her prominence in society in Newport. And because society in Newport, like, again, so many other things, is fast disappearing, if not totally disappearing in the next couple of years. And that was a very sad loss, I think, for everybody who loves Newport.
Calling Eileen the Grande Dame could ruffle the feathers of others who felt that they were as grand. She was not the richest. She was certainly, at the end, the most senior in terms of age. Nobody was more vivacious or outgoing than she. She was enormously family-oriented and had a large family on which she could lavish her love and attentions. Was Eileen the end of an era? Yeah, I'd have to say she was.
Grande Dame she was much more than a Grande Dame. A Grande Dame is just in a box, a wonderful person. She was an ultra, ultra, ultra Grande Dame with a lot of savoir-faire.
How do I say this? I feel very strongly that Eileen was not really representative of any era. She was a spike. She was a spike in that she combined so many elements together. The lavishness of her house, the lavishness of her parties, the deep commitment to political causes, the ability to get along with and be admired by a wide range of people. I think that is what made her unique.
You picked on a woman that's very an extraordinary woman, Eileen. You know, and different, not completely different from most women. You know, very bright, very ambitious. I'd say They broke the mold, you know. There's nobody, there's never been anybody like Eileen.
The fire's burned down to just next to nothing.
It does, but it leaves a kind of a warmth back there.
I think always as I close my eyes, safely through another day. Safety to me means escape from harm or injury to the eventual comfort of a little grave in our own plot in the Newport Cemetery, with my spirit somehow linked interminably with that of my father, grandmother, and little sister, who are waiting there to welcome the arrival of the next members of the family. I cherish the knowledge that life is not for a moment to be taken for granted, but a sublime gift that must be continually adored as a manifestation that we can know of our Heavenly Father, besides the Spirit that moves us.